Welcome to Reconnect, the podcast dedicated to sharing and defending the good news of Jesus Christ. All religions except Christianity require mankind to work to overcome our greatest problem. It is in Christianity alone that we have divine redemption through the person and work of Jesus of Nazareth, who through his life, death, and resurrection defeated sin, death, and the devil forever. Reconnect us, O Lord. Hey, this is Andy Rasman. This is episode 83 of Reconnect. Thank you for downloading this and listening to it or streaming it live right now, whichever way you are doing it, from iTunes or my website, andyrasman.com. Wes is back with me after a hiatus of I don't know how many episodes, probably almost 10. But Wes is back, and we are going to be discussing conversation starters that would be for the purpose of hopefully being able to present the gospel to someone, a simple way of getting the conversation towards spiritual matters or towards discussing God's word, or in particular, the gospel, since that is the goal of Reconnect, sharing and defending the good news of Jesus Christ. Before we defend the good news of Jesus Christ, sometimes we need to present the good news of Jesus Christ, and that's not always the easiest thing to do with random strangers, close friends even, neighbors who I've known now for 2 or 3 years, and it may be a little awkward now 3 years down to be like, hey, never asked you before, are you a Christian? Do you know Jesus? Little awkward to do that. I think this is kind of in the same vein as the podcast episode 80 with Robbie and Ellie, where we discussed common English sayings that actually come from the Bible. So kind of like you hear someone say something, you're like, oh, that's cool. Did you know it came from the Bible? And then you at least are talking about that. So think of this episode in a similar vein as that. Just ways to get this conversation going. I did a quick search, conversation starters, or evangelism conversation starters, and one of the websites that came up was Cold Case Christianity, which is run by J. Warner Wallace. He was on episode 22 of Reconnect, so you can go back and listen to that if you haven't, to hear his voice personally. But in this article, J. Warner Wallace says, in his opinion, the best question to ask when starting a conversation about God is, do you believe in life after death? Another phrasing of it would be, what do you think about the afterlife? Wes, what do you think about that question? Just up.
Well, I mean, I'm looking at ahead a little bit, but I think I like it as long as, there's a way to bring it into the conversation where the person's not like, well, where did that come from? Or as long as there's a way where you feel like it won't be offensive. And I think this is a question that has less chance of being offensive than perhaps others. And I think that's why the author has probably experienced some success with it. It will allow, if the person's interested, it will allow for you to kind of get to some very Christian good news in a hurry if they're interested in talking with you about this.
Which I guess could come up in any number of situations if there's some sort of massive earthquake and a lot of people died, or some sort of terrorist attack and someone died, or so maybe something along those lines. Someone's like, man, did you hear what just happened about whatever, and who knows if it was a church that was attacked and people died, that would even make sense too. Like, well, I mean, it was a church that was attacked. I mean, I guess those people those families would have comfort, right? At least knowing that their loved ones are in heaven. What do you think about?
Yeah, death, you either ignore it or you have to deal with it. Mm-hmm. And having to deal with it means answering this question: what happens when we die? So.
Yeah. The reason I wanted to use his article, because, I mean, I looked online. There's a lot of articles you can find with a lot of different questions you could use. But I like this one because he at least gave, like, a framework, which I think we're going to use to just diagnose or evaluate various other questions I found online. But J. Warner Wallace likes this one because he said it's diagnostic, it's disarming, and it's directed. Diagnostic meaning that it at least gives you a footing to know what the other person believes. From their answer, you may immediately find out that they're a Christian.
Or they believe in reincarnation. Or you're going to find out real quick.
Or if they're an atheist, well, nothing happens when we die. Oh, well, maybe you're Buddhist, but I mean, atheist, Buddhist. But it's disarming. I like it. The way he worded this is that questions about the afterlife are often easier to ask than questions about God, even though the discussion of one inevitably leads to the discussion of the other. Many people have given thought to the issues of life and earth, even though they haven't seriously considered the existence of God. You'll be surprised how many people are willing to talk about this question. I don't think I've ever actually asked someone this question. What do you think happens when we die? But I could imagine, like what he said, a lot of people probably have an idea or belief on it, or at least want to know, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, in the face of people giving testimonies that they've had some vision or dream where they went to the afterlife and came back and offered something, I think it's pretty evident that people are fascinated by such stories, even if they've never considered too much, what happens to me after I die, because they just don't want to think about it. When they hear other people's talking about it or sharing their story about it, they're very interested. So at least it's got that going for it.
And maybe even depending on the setting, because like you said, the comfortability of this is something to consider, like in the disarming sense. Like one of my favorite actors is Keanu Reeves. I think few people would say that, but I do think he's a great actor. He was in a movie.
He's in some fun movies. That's for sure.
He was in a movie called Constantine, and in that movie Constantine, he's literally a guy that somehow died and went to hell at some point, and somehow God gives him a second chance or something along these lines. I'm not sure if I got the details right. It's been a while since I've seen it, but I really do like the movie. But there's a scene in there where he goes to hell, even through some magic, and comes back. And he ends up killing himself near the end, spoiler alert, in order to basically get the devil to come. Because he's the one soul that the devil would want to collect because of all the demons that he's cast out back to hell. Oh, all the demons he's exorcised. So to get the devil to come to actually wreak some havoc on the bad guy in the movie, because the devil and the bad guy are enemies, he's like, fine, I'm going to slit my wrist, and then the devil will come and beat you up. It was very odd, very bizarre. I enjoyed the movie, though. Maybe I've talked more on that to explain why I enjoyed it in another episode.
Man, if I was going to... Never mind. Slit my wrist? Gosh, that's what an awful option.
But, like, I think, if I watched that movie with someone, it's a guy movie.
Sure. Action, yeah.
It'd be very easy to be like, dude, this whole movie was about a guy, like, either, like, wanting to get into heaven. I think that's why I liked it. It's about a guy wanting to get into heaven through doing good works, and ultimately he makes it into heaven when he realizes it's not about his good works, and it's about trusting God, kind of. Although they kind of...
That was in there loosely?
In there loosely.
Oh, cool. Okay.
There's a whole scene where the angel Gabriel tells him, he's basically arguing why won't he, that evil guy up there, deciding who goes up and who goes down. And it's all based on like some arbitrary list of rules of how good you are, and you never know if you're good enough. And it's like, yeah, that's Allah of Islam. But the angel Gabriel's like, no, you don't get it. It's about belief. And he's like, I believe. And then she goes, no, you know. And that's different from belief, which is James's argument. The demons know. Argument, so yeah. I love it because of that scene and some other interesting cool stuff.
That is a cool scene. Okay.
So it's ripe with gospel stuff, but like maybe to get to that gospel stuff, it could be cool to just be like, hey, like this whole movie's about heaven and hell, and a guy wanting to get to heaven, and it has some really scary pictures of hell. Like, what are your thoughts on all that? Is it all fiction? And then the person can tell me.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I do like it. That does seem disarming, me asking it in that type of context.
Yeah, anything that's fiction, whether it has truth behind it or not, gives us some kind of common ground to talk about, right? I mean, people love Lord of the Rings, Christian or not. People love the Narnia movies, Christian or not. And when you talk about these kind of movies, you have sort of common ground because you're just talking about a work of art, right?
Yeah. So maybe my neighbor that loves Star Wars, I could be like, hey.
Yeah.
So when Yoda...
When you die, do you become one with the Force? Is that how it works?
So what's the actual Star Wars canon say about Anakin and Yoda and Obi-Wan when they're dead, but you kind of see their ghost-like image? Like, what's the actual Star Wars canon say about that? And it may be from there somewhere. I can say, do you think that's what happens to us when we die? And then I can know what he actually believes. I don't know. Anyway,
I have some students that would probably work for Got some serious Star Wars lovers out there.
That would certainly be a disarming way of going about it, I would think, for the guy. But then finally, it's directed, according to J. Warner Wallace, to ask about the afterlife, because as a Christian, we're going to immediately end up sharing what we think happens.
Yeah, and the thing for Christianity is that what we think happens is actually at the very heart of the gospel, right? In Lutheran talk, Christ saves us from sin, death, and the devil, but that salvation from death is the final hope, right? Our glorified bodies one day when Jesus finally comes back and raises the dead, and Christians not to a resurrection of the judgment, but to a resurrection of life. That's why we grieve death, but not as those without hope, because we have this great hope and rescue from death, bodily resurrection. So yeah, it is directed because Resurrection Day is at the center of the gospel.
All right, so that was J. Warner Wallace, his best question. You may not like that question. It may not fit for you. It may not fit for every situation. It may not fit for every, just for a random person that you met. There may be a different question that would be needed. And so I found another list. I forget the website on this, but it will be on episode 83 at andyrasman.com. This one, the article was entitled Talking to Unchurched People About God and His Plan of Salvation. Something they had in here was that half of the unchurched Americans surveyed by Gallup pollsters said they intend to return to active church participation someday. Of that group, 1 in 5 said they would start back to church if someone would just talk to them about spiritual matters. So that was sort of their motivation to get us to talk to people, besides quoting Acts 4:20, which says we cannot help speaking about what we have seen and heard. And I think, obviously sometimes I can help it, or I'm fearful of it in some way, and maybe being prepared with some of these questions could be a way for me to begin to initiate these conversations. Wes, before we dig into these and look at if it's diagnostic, disarming, or directed, do you struggle with certain people groups, or like your neighbor or anything, or do you think it's even inappropriate to just have this conversation with your neighbor?
Yeah, I mean, the truth is for me, it's way easier to give the gospel to someone I'm not very familiar with than to someone I am. I've never tried to analyze why that is, but none of my uncles are believers. I don't see them that often, but I do see them. Mm-hmm. If I go and see my uncle and I know he's not a believer, am I going to bring up God or Christ or life after death? My track record is very clear. No, I'm not.
Yeah.
Why? And I've never tried to analyze that. My dad doesn't either. These are his brothers. Why doesn't he do that? I don't know. I've never asked him. I'm sure he has, and it's been very unsuccessful, and there's probably a history there. But yeah, with strangers, it's almost easier.
Yeah.
Just because you don't have like a past record of trying and them not being interested, or trying and them being upset.
Yeah.
But with people I know, it's honestly the most, I don't know if anxiety is the right word, but it's almost the least likely that I'll bring it up. I'm not proud of that, but that's kind of the facts. I remember most of my experience of just kind of sharing Christianity with strangers came when I was much younger. I mean, now in my life, I work at a Christian school. I don't come across a ton of unbelievers because all my coworkers are believers.
That's very true.
And most of my life is at work, at home, at church. So my life doesn't include a lot of places where I am in regular contact with a lot of strangers who knows what they believe. It used to, though, when I was 18, 19, 20, I used to do some amount of work down longshoring at the port. And, you just get a different job every time with different coworkers every time. And I was constantly talking with strangers.
Yeah, very much so.
And every conversation was the same. So, hey man, what's your story? Oh, my name's Wes. I'm just, in college, just trying to make some money on the side. Oh, where do you go to college? Concordia. Never heard of it. What kind of college is that? It's a Christian Lutheran college down in Irvine. Oh, so are you a Christian? I am. Yeah. I'm even studying theology. It's really interesting to me. Oh, and then from there, I don't even do anything. Now they know I'm a Christian and they want to ask me something. That was like every single conversation I had down at the docks.
Yeah.
It was just so easy. No work required.
Yeah, that was my experience doing construction work too.
Yeah.
When after high school I did I was in the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers for a year and a half.
Yeah.
And, you know, like 18 years old, it was like, you know, they're like one of the topics of conversation were usually sex.
Yeah.
It really was. Like,
locker room guys,
you know, like, hey, I'm married. Like, I'm kind of stuck with this woman. Like, who are you sleeping around with? You know, it's like, no one. You got a girlfriend? Like, no. Are you gay? No. Why? Well, how many people have you had sex with? None. What?
There must be something wrong with you. What is it?
This guy hasn't had sex before, and you're like 18. You're like, what? Like, this is for real? Why haven't you? Well, man. No, it's not for lack of want or lack of opportunity, potentially. Even it's I don't think I should. Yeah, you know, why don't you think you should? Right. I can go the secular route and say STDs or greater likelihood of divorce in the future or unwanted pregnancy, or I can say God doesn't want me to do this. You know, I don't think it's prescribed by us. I don't think it's in our best interest. So that was coming up all the time, you know. And then sometimes when they found out I was a Christian, it just became even more of a. They would come to me with questions all the time.
Yeah. Like, even if they're not going to agree with you, they find out and they kind of want to know what you think.
Yeah, all the time.
Yeah.
You know, especially I was working that job when 9/11 happened, right? And that was gnarly too, because it was like clearly we had a president that was quoting scripture and all the time when he was addressing the war on terror and even addressing what happened on 9/11. So that was easily like, dang, like, you know.
I mean, I think it would be the same way for me now if I just happened to be in situations where I was regularly meeting new people. Mm-hmm. Like, oh, hey, what's your story? Oh, I'm a high school teacher. Oh, where do you teach? Korean Lutheran. What do you teach? Christian doctrine. Oh, so it would be probably the same type of conversation now. I'm not in those situations, nor am I, putting myself in those situations.
I found usually happens to me if I'm meeting people at more of a social gathering.
Sure.
But with my neighbors, I teach at Korean Lutheran. What do you teach? World religions and apologetics. Oh, okay, that's cool.
End of conversation.
It's the end. So it's like I don't really.
Yeah,
didn't go anywhere. So, but I don't know if I'm supposed to be like, so what religion are you? Like, that's supposed to be my follow up.
Why not? I guess you could try.
If you have any religious questions, send them my way.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it's definitely something I struggle with. I think with people.
Yeah, I guess my neighbors too. I'm not like an outgoing neighbor. I don't know my neighbors very well.
Yeah, but I mean, I have the desire to, so I intentionally go out and share the gospel on college campuses, and I do it through signs and posters that elicit conversation, and I know the people that come up to me want to talk, and I'm doing that this next Tuesday, but, I'd like to have more of that with people in my life that I see day to day that aren't just strangers. So let's look at some of these questions. Maybe listeners struggle like we are in this regard. Maybe these will help them. General issues. This article breaks up questions in general issues, relationship questions, devotional life and practice, the church, and religion and illness. So for general issues, what gives most meaning to your life? What or who are your sources of strength in your day-to-day living? When you have problems or crisis, how do you manage to get through them? Is religion or God important to you? In what ways? If not, is there any particular reason why not? Wouldn't you like to have faith in something? It was another question. So, general issues. Well, diagnostic, do you think some of these are diagnostic?
I think number one, I have to do it one at a time because I can't think that fast. What gives most meaning to your life?
Yeah,
it could be. It really depends where they go. I mean, if they just say something like my family, then I don't know that I've learned that much from that answer, just that their family's important to them.
Yeah.
Who or what are your sources of strength in day-to-day living? I'm really curious how someone would even answer that. I guess that would be almost more diagnostic than the first one because that gets more specific.
Do you even how would you answer that?
What gives me source of strength in day-to-day living? Reminder that the whole world is in his hands, just like that God is good and that he's all powerful and that I'm his child. So no matter what's happening, those facts remain true.
Interesting.
But I imagine a lot of Christians would answer in similar but different ways.
Yeah, I feel like I would answer very secularly.
Oh, really?
Like, I'm thinking like physical strength. Like,
sources of strength.
like I'm tired in the morning.
Caffeine.
Like crank some music in the car on the way to work.
I mean, they might not take it in the direction that probably the author of that question intended. I suppose that's possible because you're not even taking it in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. Yeah.
When you have problems or crises, how do you manage to get through them? I don't feel like that's as diagnostic.
Yeah,
because I feel like just what you said. Well, I like to just kind of check out, maybe watch a good movie, and then get back to the story. Get back to whatever's going on in my life.
And for me, that one would be more diagnostic.
Oh, really?
If there's a problem or crisis, first thing I do is pray. Which is partly my downfall, potentially, because like if I'm not, I mean, shouldn't I always be praying? Shouldn't I always be getting my source of strength from God? I'm maybe very much like Paul, where unless I'm weak, I may not.
I don't think that's you. I think that's more or less everyone.
Yeah.
Well, this also just has to do with how we think of prayer. I don't think prayer has to always start with hands folded and end with an amen. Prayer can just be our thoughts to God. Yeah.
I mean, if I'm worn out or tired, watch a movie.
Yeah.
Right? Just chill. But problem or crisis, I think that'd be very diagnostic for me. Pretty interesting. Is religion or God important to you? That's very diagnostic.
That is diagnostic.
I mean,
and that might not be a question that could work with just anyone. I mean, how much do you know about this person? Is that the right question?
Yeah. It's certainly not disarming either.
No.
His disarming
as soon as you use a word like
category.
religion or God, it's
whoa.
Yeah.
Why are you asking me that and I don't want to talk to you anymore?
Politics and religion are like those no-nos.
Which could be some of that, what you just said, I think, is some of that kind of fear or oppression, because it's like, it's you said it's a no-no. It's like a social no-no. Politics and this, kind of you're not supposed to say, you're not supposed to talk about.
Yeah, because they just expect it to become heated, and they just don't want to deal with it.
I mean, I don't really care about the politics so much. To me, that's the news. So let's talk about the news. Did you hear what Obama just did? Did you hear what Trump just did? Did you hear whatever celebrity just said?
Sure.
What movie's coming out? To me, that's just news, so that's easy. Rarely do you hear like up-to-date like religion stuff. I mean, and obviously with our religion, like the Bible's, for the most part, we would say a closed book. I mean, it's open only hypothetically. Theoretically.
Have you done a podcast on like the whole open closed canon thing?
No.
Okay.
Could have a Pentecostal on here.
Invite Dr. Middendorf. See what he says.
Anyway, so I think those are pretty maybe diagnostic. I don't know. Some of them would certainly lead to it when it's giving my answer, right? What's your source? I mean, if I intentionally wanted to say I draw strength from the Lord every day.
I will give Wallace a point here, though. I think his question is more diagnostic more often than these are. So it's got that going for it.
Yeah, exactly. And even the religion's important to you. I mean, it would at least be diagnostic if the person's Christian and they tell me, I think religion is all evil. It's like, well, what? I know a lot of Christians that would say that because they think Christianity is not a religion, it's a relationship.
Yeah, I still hear that on the radio.
So,
now, fifth one, wouldn't you like to have faith in something? I don't know. I can't even analyze why, but for some reason I don't like that question.
And
Wouldn't you like to have faith in something?
Well, it means you're a loser.
Like something's wrong with me
more.
if I don't like, I don't know. I don't like that question.
Like, no, I'm pretty self-confident in myself and my own abilities. Well, yeah, that would be a problem, right? In terms of like, humble yourself inside the Lord. Relationship questions. That's kind of interesting. Does God or higher power seem personal to you? Do you feel close to or far away from God? What do you imagine that God is like? Can you point to things that God has done for you? How is God working in your life right now? Are you comfortable with what you understand to be God's guidelines and laws for living? Do you feel there are barriers of some type separating you from God? Have you ever been mad or upset with God? Have you ever done something for which you feel God could not forgive you? Do you understand the way to forgiveness and what it means? Do you think God has a plan for each person's life? What would it take for you to live up to what God expects of you? I think this is interesting that these are called relationship questions.
Yeah, every single one of those assumes belief in God.
Or it's like your personal relationship with God is more what's talking about, right?
I think so.
So these would all be diagnostic, big time.
Yeah, and you'd find out real quick whether or not that question even matters to them. Do they believe in God? Because otherwise, all of these questions are just they don't work.
Which, I mean, all of these would be great to ask any believer if you want to have a conversation with them. Some of them are getting into that relationship type stuff, which is usually, I think, we've talked about this a little bit on the show before, when how's your relationship with the Lord really can become just a lot of law, because it's like, well, what are you doing, right? It's all about you keeping this relationship. And relationships do require work for them to grow. Do you feel there are barriers of some type separating you from God? That's an interesting one.
Yeah, I feel like there's a couple of these questions on the list where even if if you ask them, do you believe in God, and they gave you some sort of answer that ultimately is no, not really. Some of these I think they still might answer anyways. Number 8, have you ever been mad or upset with God? I can imagine an atheist just kind of answering that for the sake of argument. I don't really believe in God, but you know what? Yeah, I am mad at him. Or even number 11. Do you think God has a plan for each person's life? I feel like even a person who doesn't strictly believe in God might still believe in this some sort of like bigger, higher plan. Which is
kind of that does God or a higher power seem personal to you?
Sure.
And that's almost like the universe has a plan, right? The universe is like movie Serendipity with John Cusack. Was that his name, Cusack?
John Cusack?
Yeah.
I don't know how to pronounce it.
I think that movie had like a lot of like these things these events that were occurring that they were like, this is too unlikely to be coincidence, right? And I guess it's supposed to be serendipity, right?
I just had to read a whole bunch of that Ray Kurzweil guy on the issue of transhumanism.
Well, who's Ray Kurzweil and
Ray Kurzweil
what's
is
transhumanism?
He's a computer information technology guy, and he's kind of a visionary of what the future is going to look like, where humans have evolved so much via our own progress and technology that now we're like post-human, we're transhuman, we've transcended what it means to be just biological beings, and now we're so integrated with technology. But anyways, I just remember
already post-human.
He would say we're like on the tipping point. We're like it's going to happen. That's the whole 2045 thing. We're like right there. It's going to happen soon. But anyways, he does these little like dialogues at the end of each chapter. And in one of the chapters,
let me interrupt you, listener. I may or may not at this point splice in the 2045 initiative YouTube clip just so you know more about what Wes is referring to.
I mean,
if I have time,
I wouldn't even do. I mean, you could do that clip, but I would do that like post-human video on YouTube if they really want to understand what this stuff is. But anyways, he does these dialogues at the end of each chapter, and one of them's like the imaginary reader says, so Ray, do you believe in God? And his answer is, I believe in the universe. And that's exactly what that made me think of. Higher power. I believe in the universe. Okay, whatever that means.
It's too much. All right. Yeah, that'd be funny. Ask, have you ever been mad or upset with God? And it's an atheist who's like, yeah.
Yeah, I just feel like this is, and this is getting a little more theological than this podcast is intending. Yeah. But, Augustine talks about how we're designed to desire God. So whether you believe in him or not, that desire is in you.
Yeah.
Which suggests that everybody's sort of a hidden theist, even if they would deny it in conversation with others.
Yeah.
And I feel like that emotion over injustice, emotion over evil kind of brings out people's hidden theism. Are you mad? I don't even believe in God, but I'm mad at him because that's where it comes out.
Atheism technically means against God, right? Root
no
etymology.
God, not God,
yeah. The one, do you think God has a plan for each person's life? I could see that one working out better in a disarming fashion.
Sure.
By just saying, do you think there is a plan for each person's life? And then you find out if it's the universe. if there isn't a plan, then the person probably doesn't believe in a higher power that's directing things. You also know they probably don't believe in any, predestination of anything, any final trajectory where we're all going to end up, probably don't have a belief in something supernatural.
Yeah, and that's almost like your rewording is kind of a tweak to that number one general issue is what gives most meaning to life. Is there meaning to life? Is there plan? Is there purpose? Yeah.
And even the plan for each person makes it very personal, which I guess is kind of that movie Serendipity I was throwing out. Because that movie, I think, was like almost the universe has orchestrated this time, this place, which I think could just be the guy trying, to hook up with the girl, right? Like, this must be destiny. We must be together. Right? And it's like, oh, yes, let's evoke the universe.
Requires this of
let's
you.
evoke something higher than, my chemicals saying this must happen. But I think that could be an interesting way, too, because I think there's so many people that talk about, even that aren't Christian, talk about looking to the good in this, or we must keep our eyes on, what's most important in life, or, this too shall pass type mentality, or even the idea of like astrology and the stars kind of dictating our lives. Like, people still read horoscopes, I assume, because they're in newspapers. Like, someone's still thinking there's some sort of something dictating our lives. And maybe just like when we see, like, if you're sitting around having coffee at a coffee shop and someone grabs the free newspaper and you kind of look at it too and you see the horoscope section, it could be like, what do you think about this garbage? Like, do you think there's actually something like the stars planning our lives?
Yeah, so I think on this list, before we move on to a different batch, like relationship questions, I think I like the fourth one. Can you point to things God has done for you? I might use that, in a conversation with someone who believes in God. I like the one you were just talking about. Have you ever been mad or upset with God? I think this could potentially create a lot of conversation where you could, ultimately get to Jesus. Even 9, have you ever done something for which you feel God could not forgive you? Give you opportunity to talk about God's radical forgiveness. I don't know if I like 11 as much as you do, that whole personal plan for life one, but maybe that's just because I'm not brainstorming ways to talk about it. But I like a few, maybe at least 3 of these on the list.
Yeah, for sure. I think this next one is maybe kind of the ones I like the best.
The devotional life and practice?
Yeah. What kinds of religious material do you like to read? What are your favorite authors' writings? That's very generic.
That is. I like that one.
Like that, you can ask that to anyone, right? Like, even on an airplane, the person's reading a book and be like,
what are you reading?
What's this person write about?
Yeah.
And obviously some people on the plane, they don't like to talk to anyone, period. And you can read that pretty quickly if the person's given one-word answers or just immediately puts their headphones on, right?
Leave them alone.
So, but sometimes like that could take off. Do you like religious music? Kinds, favorites? I mean, you don't even have to say religious music. You could just do what was above. What are your favorite authors' writings?
On that second one real quick, I just realized this. If I'm ever reading something on a plane and I'm sitting next to a stranger, they will usually glance over and ask me what I'm reading. Mm-hmm. So that does show kind of a disarming nature to that to that type of topic of conversation.
I actually had an entire talk once about my book Contradict before it was published. I was wanting to edit it on a plane flight. And the guy can tell, like, I got this Word document. And he's like, what you working on? Because he can probably clearly see, like, it's a lot of writing. And it doesn't look like a single page meeting, right? So I told him what it was. And then he just, like, spent the entire next, like, 4 hours of the flight asking me questions about Contradict and, like, religion. So I was like, I guess I'm not editing, and I guess that's perfectly okay right now.
Yeah, I'll just do that instead.
That's kind of what the whole point in this thing was.
It's awesome.
I think for me, the music's kind of cool because I like music. It could substitute movies, and, depending on what music they listen to, you could then potentially, if they say country music, be like, is it because you're a Christian or because you like to drink beer?
What if they say I like death metal? Then what?
And then it's easy. That's in my wheelhouse. Have you ever read much of the Bible? That's interesting. Like Christian doctrine. I'm a Christian doctrine teacher. Like, oh, okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, have you read much of the Bible? It's kind of what I do, curious what the person would say if they then would be like, actually I have, and I don't like it.
Yeah.
Here's why. Do you understand the Bible when you read it? Does Bible reading help in living? How is prayer a meaningful part of your devotional life? Do you feel there is spiritual growth going on right now in your life?
I think I like the first few. They just have to do with kind of people's interests, finding something maybe we have a common interest to connect and talk about. And I can kind of steer that conversation towards why I like what I like, or asking you why you like what you like.
Yeah. I'm curious if they put who are your favorite authors, just suspecting maybe they're going to say J.R.R. Tolkien, and we're just going to like run with that, like, oh, he was Christian,
I doubt they will say that.
Or Harry Potter, clearly that's a leap because it's all about Wicca.
No, it's not.
Yeah,
Harry Potter's not all about Wicca. Give me a break.
It's about Wicca.
No, I love Harry Potter. It's not about Wicca. Just because I like it, it's not
Star
about
Wars,
Wicca.
So I go, oh, I love, anything in the Star Wars universe. I read that. Oh, yeah? So are you a Taoist? Whatever you want.
See, you're doing the same thing there. Star Wars, it's all about Taoism. No, it's not. I mean, there may be elements in there that are true, but
yeah, obviously you wouldn't jump that quickly.
Yeah,
you would, bring up, find out a lot more. And it's stuff I like. I like Star Wars.
And these questions that are just kind of all getting at the idea of like, what's your view of the Bible? If they're willing to talk about that, that's great. That'll be easy opportunity to talk about, my view of the Bible and what they think of that too. Mm-hmm. I feel like that's a good way to go just with a lot of these, and that may be more like wrap up podcast material, but just like oftentimes there are ways that you can just disarmingly talk about yourself that isn't arrogant, that isn't, you're just talking. But because you're a Christian, you're talking about, God or scripture or prayer and they're okay. And they may or may not be interested. But if they are, they'll ask you questions and then you can just kind of run with that.
Yeah. The church, these are, obviously this is very direct, right? In a way, at least invitationally, I would think.
You go to church? Yeah.
Are you involved in a church? What you get out of being involved in a church?
I like that question. Why do you go to church? Do you go to church? I do actually. Why?
What do you get out of being involved in a church? What teachings of your church resonate the most with you? Do you personally know anyone who is the pastor of a church? Are you a member of an accountability or nurturing group in your church? So that's cool. And then let's just go to the last one. Religion and illness, dying and death. Has being ill made any difference in your thinking or feeling about God or your religious faith? Interesting. How has being ill affected your devotional life? When you are ill, do you ever feel that God may be punishing you or that it is his will for you to be sick? How do you feel about suffering? Do you trust God with your future?
Yeah, this one, to my knowledge, you or I can't personally relate to. And I mean, long-term illness, I have not had that yet, probably.
Yeah.
But I've listened to plenty of people who have and talk about it, and it's very clear that it's affected the way they think about God, for better or worse, affected their devotional life, for better or worse.
Yeah, and in particular, if mental illness.
Yeah.
In terms of like depression, like clinical depression usually.
Yeah, I got people who come to mind right away when you say depression. Yeah.
Yeah, how do you feel about suffering? That's kind of interesting. I mean, I guess.
What are they supposed to say to that? Hey, how do you feel about suffering? Sucks.
Yeah.
I don't like the wording of it. Suffering's a great conversation topic. It sure can be, but I don't like the wording of that. There's got to be another way to get to that topic if it were appropriate. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it would have to be some sort of contextual scenario. Like you're watching TV with something. Most of mine are like watching TV, but it's like one of those commercials play where it's like donate so much money a month to feed an orphan in some other country overseas somewhere. And the thing would be like, dang, what's your thought on that?
Yeah.
Like why does that child grow up in such a setting? And we actually can drastically change that child's life for $30 a month. Like,
Yeah.
I wonder what people would say if they would then just be like,
I don't know. I mean, those commercials make me uncomfortable.
yeah,
It shows my sinfulness.
hard to look at, hard to consider. Do you trust God for your future? That'd be interesting if you actually know a person who is suffering and has an illness.
Do you trust God with your future?
You know, like someone just gets diagnosed with something, and it's like, sorry to hear that. You know, especially if it's like just more of an acquaintance, you know? Like it is the neighbor. Hey, I just got diagnosed with this. Well, besides, okay.
Yeah,
well,
it's kind of are things going to be okay, do you think?
yeah.
Is there, if the answer is yes, why do you think that?
Uh-huh.
And ultimately, do you trust God with your future? Is that why?
Uh-huh.
I think I like that question. I don't know if I would word it the same way, but what it's getting at, I think
like what you said. Do you think things are going to work out okay for you?
Yeah, and that's whole Mallinson's everything's going to be okay, right? Do you think it will be okay? Like, you just found out that you have such and such a disease, and the doctors say, well, ultimately this leads in death. I don't know if you're going to have 5 years or 10 years or 20, but this is, I mean, there's no cure for this that we're aware of. And you have that, and you find out someone has that, and you go, man, like, that's awful. I'm so sorry to hear that. Is there anything that comforts you, even in spite of that? Like, is it going to be okay, even though that's awful news?
You just said everything's going to be okay.
Yeah, that's that line that Dr. Mallinson over at Concordia uses in his podcast, on Virtue in the Wasteland podcast. Everything's going to be okay. That's how he finishes it. Yeah.
So unpack that a little bit. Like,
yeah, I mean,
is that like something you say, and the person then is like, okay, I just told you I got cancer, and you just told me everything's going to be okay, and they're not a Christian. Is the response then okay? Well,
the good news is the response. Then you give Christ.
Right?
Yeah.
So is that how he's using it? As a prompter for the gospel, like everything's going to be okay, no matter what.
I think
okay.
I think when you'd have to ask him. I think when he's using it, he's talking mostly to Christians. But if it were used to a non-Christian, it's not disingenuous, because if they ask you about it or challenge you on it, Christianity has the one good, true, good news that everything really is going to be okay in Christ. Death is not the end. Christ promises, resurrection. Sin is not necessarily condemnation. Christ has taken it all upon himself, right? So I can talk about Christ for you and invite you to believe Christ for you. And in that sense, everything's okay. And this is the whole, Christ is making all things new. So, it's not disingenuous. It's what the gospel means, at least to the Christian, that everything is going to be okay. Whether I die a painful death or, die, just of old age in some less painful way. Either way, everything is okay, because Christ keeps his promises, and death won't be the end of me. And he'll raise me, and I'll live forever, right? So everything is okay. My grandma died when I was 16. That sucks. We should grieve that. I grieve that. But everything's okay in the sense that that's not the end of her. She was a believer, and I'll see her in heaven, right?
Yeah, I struggle with that. Everything's going to be okay.
I like it. I don't struggle with it at all. Yeah.
Even with the non-believer, if your grandmother was a non-believer, I guess everything's going to be okay. Because
no,
you're in Christ.
If it's a non-believer,
because how can you say that?
Well,
everything's going to be okay. My so-and-so
for the believer.
Just died.
Everything's going to be okay for the believer.
So that's why I just don't like the saying. Like, what if I said everything's going to be okay, and the person's like some new age wacko? I'm sorry to say wacko. It's not respectful. Some person's some new age person, and they're like, yeah, man, I am just trusting that.
No, you're right. It's for the believer that everything's going to be okay.
Yeah.
But that is. It's for the unbeliever also as an invitation, because it's true. And this is, Lutherans like to say objective, subjective justification. Objective justification, that Christ is the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world, that God desires that all men be saved and come to the knowledge of the truth. So he's sent Christ to take care of all that. In that sense, everything is okay.
Yeah.
But subjective justification, what you're getting into, only if you believe it. Do you believe it? When the Son of Man returns, will he find faith on earth?
Yeah.
And in that sense, you're right. I mean, this is like...
Because Romans 8:28, that, God works for good in all things.
Right. God works all things for good for those who love him.
For those who love him.
Yeah. So it is for the believer.
So
you're right.
there is that subjective, tension to it. And obviously, People come to that subjective connection through the gospel, through the objective gospel, which is for all.
Outside of Christ, it's not okay.
Yeah.
So that's true.
Anyways, guys, hopefully you enjoyed these questions. Hopefully it even maybe makes you think of some things diagnostically. Where am I with someone? Gauging where they are. Maybe even trying to approach in a disarming manner, as well as hopefully being intentional. That being direct at some point may be a way which they don't think you're doing it directly, right? Which may be part of the goal with having it be disarming. But just leaving, hopefully, the people in our lives to be able to share the gospel with them. And questions are a good way of getting the ball rolling, I think, more so than being directly stating something to them.
Yeah, I think if you're really trying to talk to someone and get to know them, and they can tell that you're genuinely interested in hearing what they have to say about what they believe, I think most of the time people are pretty friendly, and you'll be able to pick up on that, and they might be willing to hear what you have to say about what you believe, and then you just kind of go from there. Well, here's what I believe.
Yeah, so probably prayer, right? Start with a lot of prayer.
Yeah.
Prayer, open doors, being bold to speak.
The believers in Acts pray for boldness. We should be praying for it too.
And so prayer should hopefully lead us to boldness. And then from there, know that we're sharing good news. That's the goal. It's good news. It's not bad news. So hopefully if the person doesn't like it, I still gave good news.
Yep.
So, all right, guys, that's this episode 83. Check it out. Leave some comments. Give a rating on iTunes if you're listening from iTunes, and look forward to getting any feedback from you, listeners, at andy@contradictmovement.org. God bless you all. Oh, yeah, my tagline. Remember, it's through the gospel that we are reconnected into a right relationship with Jesus Christ.
Hey there, come check out blueeyedshyguy.blogspot.com, where I write about faith, family, and philosophy. Topics range from comparative religion, the nature of God through science and reasoning, and even open discussions on difficult social topics such as same-sex marriage and abortion. Each post is written with love and a desire to relate biblical principles with clarity. That's blueeyedshyguy.blogspot.com. Or you can visit facebook.com/blueeyedshyguy, where I post encouraging thoughts, scriptures, and original memes. And if you can't remember any of that, no worries. You can just Google Blue-Eyed Shy Guy and click whatever comes up. You might even find my YouTube channel where I make videos with my family. Any way you want to find me, you'll be glad you did.
To financially support Reconnect, visit contradictmovement.org and order your copy of Contradict, They Can't All Be True. Contradict stickers and tracks are also available. Again, that's contradictmovement.org. Your mission, if you choose to accept it. Share this episode on all of your social media sites and with your email contacts, people who will benefit from listening to the show. Thank you for listening. Reconnect us, O Lord. Your mission, if you choose to accept it, share this episode on all of your social media sites and with your email contacts, people who will benefit from listening to the show. Thank you for listening. Reconnect us, O Lord.